Okay, we'll try it again.
Okay.
All right. And so this we're going to start all over again. We have Stephen Yorba. Uh, he's the manager of the Lopez Urban Farms in Pomona, California. Is that correct, Pomona?
Yes.
Okay, I'm pronouncing that right.
Mona.
And he's a urban farmer. He's
Yes.
a educator as well as a participant. Uh, how do you pronounce that? Participatory activist. What is a participatory activist?
That's kind of an academic term. It's you're on the ground in the middle of community. It's kind of grassroots,
Okay, all right.
involved in involved in the participation of changing community.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so you're building urban farms and you're equipping urban farms with education, and you also you say that's what you do.
Yeah.
That in itself, you say you're against um, ideologies, uh, capitalism, corporation, profiteering, uh, militarism, racism, bigotism, uh, segregation. You're on the ground, and you believe that you liberate. You believe in liberating and the improving the community through the destruction of things that was going on in society. And can you tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about
Yeah.
what it is that you do on the Lopez Urban Farm?
Yeah. I think we do all of those things, and that's what urban farms should do. Um, Urban farming is an act of disruption.
Okay,
Disrupting the status quo, dis, disrupting corporate grown food, industrialized food systems, um, in communities that are often marginalized, that are um, that are affected the most by these systemic systems of racism and segregation and corporatism and I think when we build an urban farm in communities like ours, it's our responsibility to address the justice needs, address injustice in our community. So we're not just an island in a community. As urban farmers, we have to be educators, we have to be justice workers, we have to be community organizers, we have to be educators. We can't ignore the systems that are oppressing our community. We can't ignore that. And so we have to address the issues in our community while we're growing food, while we're educating. So we're more than just urban farmers, we're justice workers, we're champions for justice. And urban farming is an act of civil disobedience. Whenever you take up a shovel, that's our tool. That's the tool we work with. Every time we take up a shovel and we dig the earth and we plant food, it's an act of disruption. It's an act of civil disobedience. It's a radical idea, right? Especially in an urban center, these concrete jungle, right? Whenever we come in and we carve out a space to grow food, create green space, and provide eco education, we're disrupting the status quo. And farming has always been a radical notion. The fact that we can grow our own food, right?
right.
Our motto is we can grow our food, we can grow our own food together.
Okay.
And it's not rocket science. Anyone can do it, and we should be doing it. We have done it in the past, right? Especially with the industrialization of food. You know, corporations serving us up. You know, we're dependent on these corporations, corporate farms, to bring us food that's often grown in ways that are not healthy for the planet and not healthy for ourselves. And I should say on the back of slave labor. And so when we come in and decide as a community, we're going to grow our food for ourselves, and we're going to disconnect ourselves from industrial food systems, that's a radical idea. We'll be responsible for growing our own food, creating our own economic system, creating our own distribution systems to get people the best food that they can eat. And they can participate in the growing of that. That's liberating. It's liberating. You know, industrial farming is the most destructive act on the planet Earth right now.
Really?
And it's killing us. Yeah. Yeah, it's destroying the earth. It's poisoned. And we're putting all that into our bodies, you know. So anytime we come into community, we decide as a community we're going to grow our own food, create our own economic system. That's a radical notion, you know. It empowers people. So that's kind of what we're doing here at Lopez Urban Farm.
Okay.
We're a 3-acre urban farm in the south side of Pomona. Pomona is about 30 miles due east of downtown Los Angeles, here in Southern California.
Okay. So you say you use children, you educate children on the farm. I've looked at a few of your clips. How do you integrate children into the Lopez Urban Farm?
Yeah, so as urban farmers, you know, we also have to be educators as well, right? If we're really going to empower the community, we have to be educators. You know, there's folks usually come to the farm thinking that they don't have the capacity to grow food for themselves, and there's so much science behind it. I always say that farming is not rocket science. Growing plants, growing things, growing food is not rocket science. It's anybody can do it. And we all intuitively know how to do it. We just haven't been empowered to do it. And so our education is directed towards children, youth, you know, 0 to 25, and their parents. We educate in the school system, the school district, and community families. We like to say that we're educating the next generation of eco-conscious human beings, because if we don't, you know, we need to get to the kids as young as we can and get their hands in the dirt, get them understanding that anyone can do this, and get them to understand that, lead them in the understanding that they are nature. And so their connection to nature, so that, you know, when they grow up, perhaps they'll think differently about the planet, about, you know, their responsibility to the planet. Because right now, some of the greatest obstacles that we're facing on the planet have to do with the environment and our relationship to it. You know, climate change and the destruction of ecosystems, poisonous farming, and production of food. So if we can get to the younger generations from a very young age and teach them how to grow food for themselves, teach them about their connection to nature, and their responsibility for it. Teach them about how ecosystems work and that they're very much a part of that ecosystem. Then perhaps when they grow up, they'll think differently. They'll make different decisions, because we are suffering from the consequences of how we've chosen to behave on this planet. That's why we're experiencing an environmental crisis at this time. And so the generations coming up need to think differently, need to act differently, and so they need eco education, to help them raise their level of consciousness, so that when they grow up and they take their place in society, they'll make different decisions than we've made in the past 100 years, right? I think they're the ones who are going to have to figure out where we go from here. And so we feel that it's our responsibility to be educators. And the farm, an urban farm, is an ideal classroom to teach all these things. And so that's what we do. We provide junior farmer training for kids 2 to 12. We teach agricultural classes on health and wellness, healthy living, healthy eating, active living classes, cultural classes, all geared towards a youth and their families. And as an educator, I think education is, a powerful tool.
Okay.
We can change things through education. I think education is really important.
Let's get into some of your farming methods. So, what methods do you use in your urban garden?
I've learned a lot from farmers who've come before me, and especially here in Southern California, we have a lot of farming knowledge that's crossed over from down south, from Mexico, and made its way here. So I've learned from a lot of farmers, their practices. Also, one practice in particular is called spin farming. Spin farming, SPIN, spin farming, small intensive plot farming, which was actually a method that came out of Canada. And it's basically, built on the method of growing in small, narrow rows. Each one of my rows is about 25 feet long and about 3 feet wide. And in those rows, the idea behind it is that we pack each row full of vegetables, and we leave very little space outside of that. So small walking paths between, which basically means we try to utilize every inch of space that we have to grow densely packed vegetables. And then we never allow any part of the farm to go fallow. We constantly, once we've harvested, we quickly turn that row over again and plant again. So we constantly have food growing in the field. And here in Southern California, we can grow all year long. So, we're basically growing food 365 days a year. We always have something to harvest. And we try to utilize every square inch of space that we have to grow food.
And so when you say spin farming, it just say a seedling requires to be spaced 6 inches apart. You're not putting the seedlings 6 inches apart? Are you putting them closer, like say maybe 2 or 3 inches apart?
Yeah, that depends on the plant.
Okay,
And, especially in the winter when you're growing winter crops, you can seed things in very thick. Like, all my roots, I grow them. I grow everything that first of all, we direct seed almost everything that we grow here on the farm. And I don't thin anything out. And I don't pay attention that much to spacing. So we seed in really thick. We don't thin out anything, and we intercrop, and we'll come in between rows of plants and intercrop other vegetables. So they're very densely packed beds. There again, when you're spacing things out 6 inches, 12 inches, in the summer when we grow, all of our vines and our tomatoes and things like that, we'll pay more attention to spacing, right?
okay.
But I usually don't pay attention to spacing in the way that people generally will. I think that has a tendency to leave a lot of extra space where you can grow in between rows, you can grow in between plants. Again, it's like utilizing every square foot, every square inch of soil to grow things. And especially when you're looking at sub-acre farming, right? When you don't have a lot of space in the first place, right? You can grow a lot of vegetables in a relatively small plot of land if you utilize the space correctly, right? And so, yeah, I seed in stuff very thick. I seed very thick and do very little thinning out of anything.
Now, does planting those seedlings where you seed in everything, and does having that not having as much space, does that act as a weed control?
It can, yeah. It doesn't. It does. So weeding is a constant practice, right? Because weeds are always going to come. But we use drip irrigation. So the drip irrigation is basically watering the plants directly, and we're not watering any other part of the farm except right at the base of the plant with drip irrigation, which helps control weeds, but we're constantly weeding. But when you're growing really thick like that, a lot of times that will help suppress weeds, right? Because the vegetables become dominant, right? And they almost become like ground cover. And of course, you're always going to have to weed, but if you have too much space between plants, then and it's getting water, it's just a recipe for weeds to grow.
Absolutely.
So we're constantly planting, we're constantly growing, we're constantly harvesting, we're constantly weeding, and so our goal is to keep control of a bed, right? So it's not overgrown by weeds.
Okay.
But we have weeds. There's really nothing you can do about that. But we
right.
don't. Our commitment is we don't use any toxic chemicals on our farm.
Okay. And so what is it that you use to
I
control
basically don't
weeds?
use anything in pest management or weed management.
So you just use it by hand? You just dig weeds up by hand? Is that it?
We all do. We hand weed in some of the paths we have. Right, we leave them bare dirt, and we'll come through with tools to weed those. But inside the beds, we get weeds very early on, so they haven't incorporated themselves in the root system of our plants. And we do that all by hand.
Okay.
We do a lot of micro weeding is what we do. We spend a lot of time micro weeding.
Okay. Can you explain to the followers what micro weeding is?
Micro weeding is when you come into a bed that's already populated with vegetables and you've got little weeds popping up. You get them at you get them when they first germinate. You come in, it's very micro intensive with your hands, and you catch weeds as they germinate. You don't allow them to grow a strong root system. You get them at the very, very early stages of their germination. So it's a lot of, intense, on your knees, going through a bed and just finding weeds as they germinate and pulling them out before they become any larger than that.
Okay.
And if we stay on top of that, then we won't get overrun with weeds. When we become lazy and we allow time to pass and we allow the weeds to flourish, then we've got to come in and do some major weeding, and it just becomes more work.
Absolutely.
And the other thing is when, in our beds, if you allow weeds to take root, then you're compromising the plants, you're compromising your vegetables. So we get the weeds before they, just after they've germinated. We consider that micro weeding.
Okay. All right. I see on your website, you speak about, I hope I'm not messing this up, Ignacio Lopez. Can you tell us who
Ignacio Lopez, yeah.
is? Okay.
Ignacio Lopez is our namesake. We're named after Ignacio Lopez. Ignacio Lopez was an immigrant from Mexico. Grew up here from a very early age here in Pomona, born and raised here in Pomona, went to school in Pomona, and then went off to college and came back to Pomona after he graduated from college. And he basically was a civil rights leader. He came back to the area, and at the time, this was the 30s and 40s. There was a lot of segregation in the valley that we exist in, and especially public places were still segregated. Movie theaters and public pools and parks and other places were segregated. And that segregation also existed within the Mexican community. And Mexicans were not allowed to swim in the public pools only on a certain day. And much like the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, Dr. King, Ignacio Lopez here was standing up against segregation in the 30s and 40s, and became a civil rights leader, became an outspoken academic and journalist. He was also a journalist. He started a newspaper called El Espectador, and it was a Mexican-American newspaper, the only Mexican-American newspaper at the time here, and written in Spanish and English. And much of what was written in that newspaper addressed these justice issues.
Okay.
And he was an organizer as well, a participatory activist and community organizer. And he was instrumental in organizing against such segregation at the time, and brought lawsuits against some of the cities here in San Bernardino and Upland and Pomona against segregation. And some of the legislation that came out of that fight became really instrumental. Lopez versus Sicombe um, was passed, doing away with segregation of public pools in the area. And that legislation, Lopez versus Sicombe, became a precedent for much of the work that was done in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. And, he was from Pomona, and not people have lost that history. And so when we had a chance to establish the farm, we chose the name Lopez Urban Farm after Ignacio Lopez. And we chose to highlight his work in civil rights movement here on the farm. And so we kind of, we're keeping his legacy alive. This is 20 some plus years before Cesar Chavez, So he's the Cesar Chavez of the 30s and 40s here in this valley where we exist. And people need to know that history. Because before Dr. King, before Cesar Chavez, there were others fighting the good fight, And Ignacio Lopez was one of those. And he's one of our own. He's here from Pomona, educated in Pomona public schools. And so that newspaper that he wrote was one of the first established. And it kind of chronicled the history, chronicled the legacy of the civil rights movement here.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So, all right. So you also talk about, regenerating soil. What are some of your soil methods?
Yeah, soil, I think, is the first responsibility for any urban farmer. Everything starts from soil. Without it, nothing grows, And in fact, one of the destructive natures of industrial farming right now has to do with the erosion of topsoil and the polluting of topsoil. And we've experienced this throughout history, right? That when the topsoil is gone, nothing grows, right? And if nothing grows, then you have no food. And if you have no food, then you have famine. And the disappearance of whole civilizations around the inability to grow food sustainably. And we experienced that in our own country here, the Dust Bowl days, right? Because of our farming practices, early on in this country, we destroyed much of the topsoil and nothing would grow. And the Dust Bowl days is all about farmers, the consequences of their farming.
Okay.
Led to the displacement of seeing that around the globe today. So soil is our first responsibility. What we do here, whenever I start an urban farm, here at Lopez Urban Farm, we started with an empty 3-acre lot. And the first thing we did was cover it in wood chips. The organic material that I usually go to is wood chips because I have access to abundance of wood chips. And so we started by covering the entire lot with about 3 feet of wood chips. And that creates a barrier between the native soil, right?
Okay.
And but it's also organic material that will break down over time and begin to build up, a thick another layer of topsoil on top of our native soil. So we start with the native soil and then we build up about 3-4 feet of wood chips. And then on top of that foundation, then we bring in our growing soil and we build our beds and we plant in that. So we're already starting the farm, about at least 4 feet above the native soil. And that's how and so we create this 4-foot barrier, right, of organic material that we grow in, and that's constantly breaking down, right, and creating a thick layer of topsoil. And then we do a lot of composting.
Okay.
All of our green waste goes into compost. It either goes to feed the animals or it goes into compost. It goes into the compost. Our animals produce manure, which goes into the compost. And that way we're constantly creating rich organic material that then goes back into our growing beds. So
Now, what's
once
the
we
difference?
once we build the farm and we're constantly composting, composting kind of closes that loop, right?
Right.
That cycle, right? So we're constantly so once we kickstart that and we're composting, then we've kind of closed the circle, and all of that compost is going back into the farm, and the farm is growing food, and then there's green waste from that that goes back into the compost, and the animals manure is going back into that compost, and all the vermiculture that we do goes back into that compost, and then that is put back into the farm, which grows good food. So healthy soil equals healthy plants, which equals healthy food, which equals healthy humans, right?
Right.
So it's constant cycle that we're in, right? Where we're creating organic material, because the best thing to put back into your farm is rich organic material that's been decomposed, and it's gone through this process. And so we're constantly putting organic material back into the farm, right? Because, every season growing food, it takes from the soil, taking from the soil. If we don't put anything back into the soil, then we're constantly taking, we're never giving anything back. So we've created this giant loop where we're constantly taking and giving, taking and giving, taking and giving back into the soil. And that's how we create this closed loop of regeneration. And it all goes back into feeding the soil. So keeping the soil rich and healthy will produce healthy, strong plants. And healthy, strong plants can fend for themselves. They have their own immune system. And a strong, healthy plant will have a strong immune system and will be able to fight for itself in the field. And so we don't have to do that much in terms of pest management. In fact, I don't really do any pest management at all.
Really?
Um, because we grow in a very biodiverse way.
Okay.
All of our vegetables are mixed together throughout the farm. We grow everything in a very diverse ecosystem. We have very healthy soil that comes from the compost that we make. And when you have healthy soil and you're growing in a biodiverse way where plants are allowed to help each other, and you have strong, healthy plants that have strong immune systems that can fight for themselves, then you have to do very little pest management. Of course, I have aphids and stuff like that, but at the same time, we're creating an ecosystem where we have attracting beneficials into the farm, your bees, your butterflies, your ladybugs, and other things that will help defend the farm from pests, right? Yeah, the
On
only
that
real
note,
yes.
you said butterflies, um,
Uh-huh.
and bees. Like bees, I understand they pollinate, but what do butterflies do?
Yeah, butterflies do the same thing, pollinators. They're pollinators. Ladybugs are a defense against other pests that might come in, like aphids. But also when you're growing in smaller areas, like we have 3 acres, you have the ability to pay more attention to your plants. And so every day I can walk the farm and I'm paying attention to what's growing, and I'm watching for pests. I'm watching for things that are going on. I'm watching for, stuff like that, right? And catching it early, right? Um, Probably one of our biggest problems is, aphids, but we don't do much about it, right? Because healthy plants are able to fend for themselves, and we'll weed out plants that have been overcome by aphids. We'll try to, quarantine them out, but we really don't have a big problem. The biggest pests we deal with right now are gophers.
Yeah.
And I trap gophers, and this season I've been having a lot of problems with crows. But in terms of pests on our plants, plants grown together in a diverse ecosystem will help each other. One plant will fend off something that will want to attack another plant, and so this kind of biodiverse ecosystem really supports itself, and then healthy plants really can fend for themselves. So we're not consumed by pest management at all. We don't have to bring in any pesticides, nothing. I don't bring anything into the farm.
Okay.
We'll get powdery mildew, like right now, some of my beans, they have powdery mildew, right?
Yeah. So what do you
But
do for powdery mildew?
well, I don't do anything. I just, it's kind of a race against the clock, right?
Okay.
I'm harvesting as fast as I can, and the powdery mildew catches up, and I keep harvesting and harvesting. And once I feel like I've got to make a decision that the powdery mildew is now won, it's consuming the plant, then I quickly pull the plant out, and I get rid of it.
Okay. Now that's because you're in California. You can grow 365.
Yeah, it depends on the climate too, right?
Right.
Everything depends on where you're at, right? You have to know your own climate. And here in Southern California, we're pretty much growing, 24/7, 365 days a year. And because of our climate, um, we grow seasonally, but seasons kind of transition into other seasons. Like I'm still growing cool season vegetables, right? But and then slowly transitioning to my warm season vegetables. And then I can get a longer season out of my warm season vegetables into the fall, because sometimes it stays warm enough. We don't have frost until December.
Okay.
So it's a different animal out here, you know.
Now with
We get longer extended seasons, but I'm still growing lettuce, and it's 90 degrees today.
yeah, it's pretty hot for lettuce. What do you do for California when it reaches temperatures into the 100s? Do you have hoop houses, greenhouses?
No, that's too much work, man.
Okay.
That's too much work, too much infrastructure, too much cost. So, in for here in Southern California where we're at, um, Southern California is broad too, because you could be by the ocean and have much cooler climate. But we're backed up here into this valley, the Pomona Valley, and it gets really hot, So, I put all my warm season vegetables in, starting in March, April, May, and it the real dog days are like August and September here.
Okay.
Those are the real dog days. And so all of my warm season vegetables, I put them in early. I start thinking about March, right?
Okay.
Because March starts to warm up, April starts to warm up, it's spring. I put all my warm season vegetables in early, and I have an early harvest. Like right now, June, July, we're harvesting our warm season vegetables because I want to get that stuff out of the field before August and September, which are the real dog days. And I want to get all that stuff harvested out of the field before the real heat comes, right?
Right.
And then I try to, even because as a farmer, yeah, those are hard months to farm, man. Nobody wants to be out on the field. And so I try to slow down my activity for about those 2 or 3 months, July, August, September, I try to slow down, right?
Right.
And I use it kind of as a resting period. Like some farmers in the East Coast might, they have to rest through the winter months, right? Because of all the snow. I don't have to. I'm busy during the winter months. I'm busy gangbusters during the fall and winter.
Okay.
So my slowdown is August, September, because it's just so darn hot. And then everything is getting hit. Everything suffers. And all my fruit on the vine is getting burnt. And so I try to get that in early and out of the field early. And
Okay.
then I come in, August, September, and start to clean stuff out, all the dead plants out, and get ready for the fall.
Okay. Now, you talked about topsoil and you mentioned compost. Can you tell us what's the difference between topsoil and compost?
It's all organic material. It's all organic material. Our native soil here in Pomona, because we exist in a valley, an agricultural valley. This whole valley was agriculture, just 30 years ago, until they tore it all out and built homes, because everybody was trying to get out of LA. So they kept coming east, right? They tore out all the agricultures. So we're kind of in a valley, an agricultural valley that grew citrus and dairy and grapes. And this valley was very productive. So what we're left with in terms of native soil, it's very rich. But as a farmer, I never want to dig down to grow things. I want to build up to grow things. So building the soil depth upwards is important for me. I never want to be digging down into the native soil. I want to build a layer on top of the native soil that will, constantly break down and feed the native soil, right? But if I just start from the native soil and I plant into that, I'm immediately I'm digging down, right? I want to
Right.
be building up. So I want to be building up that layer of soil, you know. The entire earth is covered by this layer of soil, and that's how everything grows, right? And you can scientifically you can look at soil and talk about how balanced your soil is. I don't really worry about that. You know, if you have good organic material, that's basically just, my compost is basically a mixture of browns and greens, right? Carbon and nitrogen. And I just keep mixing that in, and then I take all that organic material and I keep adding it on top of our growing beds. So I'm thickening the layer of soil, and that's the best thing that I can put in it.
Now, where do you get your browns and your greens from? Or what are your browns and greens?
The browns for me, it's what I have access to. So my browns are usually wood chips, and my grains are the excess plant material that I have. And then I use manure from the animals.
Okay.
We used to grow in um, we used to grow in soil that we made at a farm in another city, and that soil was made from the combination of wood chips and cow manure. Because in the dairy farms, you have access to a lot of cow manure. The problem is in Pomona, we're not allowed to bring manure into the city. And so you really have to work with what you have, you know?
Now, is that legislation that doesn't allow you to bring manure into the city?
Yeah, the city has ordinances about bringing manure into the city. But if you go next door to a city or two cities over where it was all dairy farms, then they have access to cow manure. And so we would take cow manure and mix it, like 50-50, 60-40 with wood chips, sometimes straw if we had it, any kind of brown material, and let that bake and cook over time. And that's what we grew in. And that was really good. But where I'm at now, I don't have access to a lot of manure. I don't have enough animals to produce a lot of manure. So our compost becomes really green based, vegetable based, We do have some community composting where people will bring their table scraps, their kitchen scraps to the farm. But really, as a farm, we produce a lot of green waste, right? So all of our plants go back into the compost process. And then because I have access to wood chips, then I use that as the other part of the recipe.
Okay.
And that'll break down very nicely.
Now, I'm just so curious because I'm pretty sure there's some type of compelling government interest that stops you from bringing compost in. So can you purchase it at, your
Well,
big
it,
box
it stops
stores?
it stops you from, you're not allowed to bring manure in, animal manure.
Animal
The
manure.
other thing we have access to now is from our waste management system. So we have a new waste management system. And with the legislation passed in California, which requires food producing companies to now green waste their materials, that they have to be diverted from the landfill and they have to go into a green waste. Our waste management system collects all the green waste from our city.
Okay.
And they take that green waste out to a facility that they've built that manufactures green waste into compost. And then they'll bring that compost back into the city. And when I say compost manufacturing, they're composting hundreds of thousands of tons of compost a day. And it's all coming from the green waste from the city. Individual homes, restaurants, businesses, whatnot. And they have this very high-tech advanced facility that composts it very quickly. It separates out any kind of trash. And what you get back in return is this really rich organic material. And I have a partnership with them. And when they bring it to me 22 tons at a time. They bring it in a huge semi truck. And I'll get that 22 tons at a time. And I've basically built the whole farm on that.
Okay.
Because I didn't have access to any more organic material, right? And I can't process compost fast enough, right? And I don't have access to the manure. And so I have to deal with what I have, right? And since now we have our waste management system turning green waste into compost and bringing it back to me, I have, an endless supply of compost now. And And we've tested it, and it's pretty good stuff, you know. And then I'll take that and I'll mix wood chips into it because I like the weight and the feel of wood chips. And then I'll put that back into the farm and grow. So we're using the waste management compost, and we're composting ourselves, and that all goes back into the farm.
Okay. Now, how long does it take for you to make compost? Was it 18 days or longer?
Well, for me, it takes a lot longer, right? You know, probably 6 months.
Wow.
But our waste management system, they have a really high-tech composting facility that will turn green waste into compost like in like weeks.
Okay.
And to bring all that back, all that composting back into the city is really important for a farm, especially an urban farm, because access to resources like that are very far and few between, right? I've got to use what I have access to because I'm not out in the rural spaces. I don't have access to dairy farms and their manure, and I have limited access. So access is always a challenge for urban farming. Finding access to land, finding access to resources, you know, that you would find abundantly out in the rural spaces. It's hard to find those resources in urban spaces. So you got to get really creative and use what you have at your disposal.
One of the things that I've noticed about in most places, when you're talking about urban farming and access to water, and building those watersheds, you know, out of those 550 water gallons, you know, quite a few people have told me that it's not enough to sustain a urban garden. And so, is that a problem that you're having in?
Yeah, I don't. Here in Southern California, we don't get a lot of rain anyways. So I don't do any water collection. What
Okay.
I do is my responsibility is to the entire farm is like a catch basin, right? So when it does rain, I don't worry about collecting the water. I just want the water to um I want the water to be held in the ground and then make its way down into the aquifers, right?
Okay.
But we don't have enough rain here to spend the time and the money and the infrastructure to catch that rain. It wouldn't be enough. So yeah, we in an urban center like this, what I do is again, you go back to soil content, right? Building up really rich soil content with the wood chips will really help capture that water and hold it for a long length of time, right? And then we use drip irrigation. So it's soil content, which holds and captures water. It's drip irrigation. So we're watering right at the plant. And 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 then it's just our access to the city. It's our access to city water.
Now, was that easy to do, or was there water already there?
Do what?
Was access to city water, was that easy to do? Was there a water irrigation system already
Yeah,
in
well,
the communities?
that's always the thing, right? It's like for an urban farmer, it's all the first obstacle is access to land. Where's land? Because land is taken up. There's no land available. Everybody owns the land. So how do you get a piece of land to farm on? And then how do you get water to it? Luckily, the parcel of land that we got access to already had some irrigation on it.
Okay.
And so we were really lucky to have the water infrastructure already available to us.
Awesome. I think we're getting close to that time. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with you. I really like what you're doing. I follow you on Instagram. I'm always impressed. Um, if you have anything to say to the followers, go ahead and say what you need to say.
Yeah, just if you're in the area, come and visit us. We're in the city of Pomona, Lopez Urban Farm. You can follow us on Instagram at Lopez Urban Farm. We also have a TikTok, Lopez Urban Farm, and you can find us on the web at lopezurbanfarm.com. And just follow us, see what we're doing. There's a lot of ways to farm, and we found a way that works for us. And if you like what we're doing, comment, follow us, DM us, come out and visit us, hit us up. And if you're farming in another part of the country or wherever you're at, keep doing what you're doing, because I think for the future, this is the future. We need to learn to be able to grow our own food and feed ourselves in a sustainable way. So keep at it, and follow us.
Awesome. So this is what I want everyone to do. I want you to love each other a little bit more, judge each other a little bit less, be blessed. This is Whitley Farms. We'll take care of you here on the farms. Whitley Farms. I'm out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll be getting back with you because like I say, I am